listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Fredrick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I'm Michael Halcomb. I'm here with Dr. Fredrick J. Long. He's in the house, and we are going to be talking today about Galatians. We're at Galatians 5, 11, and 12. So if you got a Greek text and you want to open it, do that now. If you want to follow us on the screen, you can do that. If you just want to listen, that's your prerogative. So, Fred, let's just jump right into it today. Galatians 5:11, I'm going to read, and here we go. Ego de adelpheu, I peritomein eti keruso, ti eti diokome, ara katergate to skandalon tu stavru. All right. I don't see a lot going on here in terms of pronunciation stuff. Just the double sigmas there. You can hold those out. Keruso, I talked about that in one of the previous episodes. Fred, you got any pronunciation things that you're seeing here or questions or?
No, I think it all looks good. Stavru would be kind of interesting. Tu stavru, kind of rolled off well of the cross. Skandalon tu stavru. Yeah.
Yes, stavru. I like that word.
Diokome. Yeah.
That's another word that sounds very different in Erasmian, right? Here we're saying diokome. Erasmian would be diokamai.
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 Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah. So, well, let's translate and discuss.
Sure thing. Ego that. So here we have another ego, instance of ego. Ego, I. The means moreover. So here we're getting new points, the de and then the I. So it's interesting that verse 10 and verse 11 begin with I. Verse 10b, which is between the two, features the one troubling you, singular. So I is surrounding the one who's troubling you. So I think that there's something there that Paul is maybe seeing himself in contrast to one lead agitator. But I might be what's called mirror reading too much. Yeah. So moreover, I, adelphi, I paratome eti keiruso, I, siblings, if circumcision still I am preaching, why am I still being pursued or persecuted? That initial ego is intriguing. This is pulled out of the protasis clause. The ego technically is fronted. It's left dislocated from the if clause, I keiruso. So this is for effect. So there's a lot of stress in the mental conception of I. So Paul is coming to the fore as an agent, and he's speaking hypothetically. If I'm still preaching circumcision, so this is I with the present indicative, keiruso. So I keiruso.
Builds anticipation, yeah? That's what
I.
That initial brother. I hanging there. Well, I.
Yeah. Well, I, moreover, siblings, if circumcision still I'm preaching, then it goes to a question, ti eti, why still am I being persecuted? So this is intriguing. This is intriguing in terms of conditional sentences. I love conditional sentences. See my Koine Greek Grammar, chapter 26. I lay out a full spectrum explanation and analysis of them. This is E with the indicative followed by a present indicative. So E, present indicative, present indicative followed by present indicative. This is what's called a present simple condition. It's indicative for a reason, and it's present tense for a reason. This is stuff that's happening now. It's happening now. This is the circumstance. So present time situation, simple statement of fact. So this is a concrete utterance of conditionality based on the situation on the ground and what he is experiencing, and that is circumcision. So if I am preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? So it's not quite a pure, what would be called a present contrary to fact. Because a contrary to fact, both the supposition, the if part, and the main hypothesis, the conclusion would be untrue. But in fact, the first one is indeed a pure supposition, which isn't true. I mean, Paul's trying to argue, I'm not preaching circumcision, but I am being persecuted. So, yeah, this is a present simple. That's all there is to say about it, is that Paul was experiencing persecution. And this is how he's going to end the discourse. He's going to say, look at the stigmata. Look at the marks on my body. And so this idea of persecution, he's going to come back to this point that that he's remaining true to the gospel. And this really gets back to a point that he made earlier. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live. The life I live in the flesh, I live by faith or allegiance to the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Galatians 2:20. So Paul is in fact living this out, and it's not a popular message. The message is not popular among his Jewish kinsfolk, who, when they see Paul preaching a message of converting, or changing people's mind to align with the one true God of the Jewish heritage and faith, when he preaches that might be fine, except when he doesn't say, oh, and now you need to become under the law and become circumcised. That is a problem. That leads to persecution by Paul. And that was leading people to come after Paul to say to the young converts, oh, if you really want to be fully saved, if you really want to come under the covenant and enjoy the full benefits of belonging to God's people, you have to come under the law. You have to get circumcised and this kind of stuff. And so Paul's expressly not pursuing that. And so he's getting into trouble socio-politically because he would like to have the early Christian group of Jews and Gentiles be together. Like, he understands them as belonging together. And I think he understands them to be under the broader umbrella or the umbrella of Israel. But this creates problems by his kinsfolk who say that's an illegal move. They're throwing a red flag. They're saying foul. They're throwing a yellow flag saying foul. That's not correct. And so this leads to Paul being persecuted because he's not bringing the Gentiles, the nations, properly into Israel. He's wanting them to have the benefits of it, even the name of it, I think. But they're saying you're not doing it in the right way. Yeah. So now I think it's interesting to see the second part of verse 11. You have an ara katergete. Then the scandal of the cross has been annulled. This also could function as almost as the apodosis. You could, but it's not. But you could. If you did have it as the apodosis, then you would need to mark this condition with an on in that ara clause to mark it as a present contrary to fact condition. But Paul doesn't produce the grammar that way. He asks the questions. Why am I still being persecuted? That's actually happening. Then, presuming that if he was preaching circumcision, which he isn't, then the scandal of the cross has been annulled. Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting how he's interrupted the grammar of the conditional sentences to in effect, not have to grammatically mark a present contrary to fact condition. Because the condition that he does create with the question is a mixed, in a sense. I mean, half of it is not really true, like if I was preaching circumcision, which he's not. But then the question part, why am I still being persecuted? That is true. That is true. So if you haven't studied conditions, if you're not quite following what I'm talking about, you really need to stop and look at what are called present contrary to fact conditions and how they're formed. And you need an on in them, particularly in the apodosis, to help mark them as contrary to fact. Yeah. So I think the pragmatic effect of the way that Paul's done this is that the ara condition, the ara connector after this question becomes a more blunt statement. The scandal of the cross has been annulled or has been removed.
Your
My dog is hungry.
calling for you there. It's interesting to notice how seven and well, the analogy of running from seven's continuing. I somewhere in like the back of my mind, I remember Toscandalone being described as like a stumbling stone put in the way of a runner, right? Like something that a runner could trip on. And so it's still sticking with that analogy, and then we have the cross is discussed as that. It's what. So thinking back to the issue of singulars and plurals, this one troublemaker. So if we're thinking of a race, they're all in this race together, and one has cut in on them to try to dissuade them, to trip them up.
Yep.
And Paul is somehow cutting in on them and laying the cross out as this like stumbling stone to trip over in the middle of the racetrack. It's kind of like this is he did it in chapter 4 where he like stacks these analogies on top of one another, and so we have here running and bread and the scandal stone. Like it's all a lot to try to piece together.
It's interesting, yeah. The pursue. I mean, I wonder if the pursue is used in terms of a running race. Why am I still being pursued? So Paul
Rather
is
than
on a course.
Yeah.
He's preaching the gospel on a course, and there's someone that's coming behind him.
Yeah. And he lays down the cross as a stone to trip that person, or I don't know. Like it's
yeah, it is interesting to think about.
Well, let's look at verse 12. It says, "Ophelon ke apokopsonde, you anastundes mas." I won't say anything about pronunciation here. Let's go ahead and translate.
Yeah, the ones troubling you would cut themselves off. ophilon. This is an idiom. It's like an interjection. Would
I
that?
wish. Yeah.
Would that? Would that also the ones troubling you, and that is present tense from anastotoo, anastotoo. The ones troubling you would be cut off. Would be have their male genitalia cut off. So yeah, this is a little bit acerbic. This is acerbic. Paul is wishing this, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and this I think fits with the tone that we've been seeing develop. That Paul is frustrated. He's probably frustrating them, frustrating the other people, but he is frustrated. He's
Mm-hmm.
perplexed about them. To even wish this kind of thing occur to somebody. He uses the same construction in Romans 9 that he says, I wish that I could be accursed for the sake of my uh, kinsfolk.
Yeah.
He says something similar there. It looks like it's a different verb, a different construction. I'm thinking maybe of another place, as it in 2 Corinthians, but ophilon, yeah, it's an idiom. And yeah, 2 Corinthians 11:1, there it is. Yeah, he says, I wish you could bear with me a little bit of my foolishness. So ophilon. So Paul pulls this word out, it seems like, in refutative contexts. And I think that's what's happening here in Galatians 5, 5:12. He is making a pretty radical statement about those pursuing being cut, which is basically, they're trying to cut in you in a race. They're cutting in. I didn't make that point of the metaphor. You helpfully mentioned that now, that the cutting in is
Yeah.
a race term during a
Yeah.
running race, to cut in. But then I think there's some double entendre to cut in. Now he's
Sure.
saying just cut it
Absolutely.
all the way off. So really emasculate themselves. I wish they'd be emasculated because of what they're doing, in a sense. Yeah, it's kind of, it's violent language. It's not typical language, but it is how Paul states it here. And I think he's been pushed to this point in a certain to a certain degree, because there's some real serious agitation. This is
Yes.
a dissuasive context where there are people hurting, and hurting other people away from the truth. And so this is
Yeah.
a pretty serious context. So we need to learn something about sometimes calling things out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so in Matthew 5, we might think the antithesis of Jesus, that we shouldn't call people names, but to call people out for what they're doing, and to kind of poke fun at that, in a sarcastic comment, may
Yeah.
be the one way that you to persuade people. So anyway,
Yeah.
we might
Yeah.
need to go to that extent to help people understand the severity of the situation and the problem. So it is a little bit of an extreme language, and it might be offensive to us to think about. But we have to remember that we're dealing with a Mediterranean culture, and we're dealing with very serious offenses and damage being done
To
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 people
to
and to
mix
individuals, to communities.
to mix another analogy in here, I mean, it is a running sports analogy, but we might say here, Paul just dunked on his opponents, right? Like with this comment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you
Yeah,
can imagine
yeah,
people in the crowd being like, "Oh, oh," like that kind of
yeah.
thing. This
He
is like
dunked
the
on them.
dunk.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's posterized them here. But well, we're
good.
gonna wrap up there. I have a parting shot, Fred.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of a silly one. But the older I get, the more I understand why roosters start their day off by screaming. So I like that one. Anyways, Yeah. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, supporting Proof Text. We hope this has been a blessing to you. Engage us, leave some comments, ask some questions, and we're really grateful for all of you who uh, like this and share it and whatnot. We're thankful. So, all right, until next time, thanks, Fred. Thanks, everybody
Thank
else.
you.
We hope
Take care.
that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.